Good morning. Thank you for joining me for Morning Manna. In our study last night, on our Wednesday night study, Matt and Mike and I are working our way in our Bible study Wednesdays through the Psalms. And I had the privilege of sharing last night. And I would like to just refresh ourselves again of a portion, just a small portion from Psalm 55. Psalm 55 is written by David. And it's a rough season as this section of Psalms in these 50s are for David. There's a lot of disappointment going on here and real perplexity and difficulty going on. And in this portion of Psalm 55, the reference is to Ahithophel, a close friend, a confidant of his, a man who was much appreciated by David. But Ahithophel, to give us the background of these couple of verses I want to read here, turns on David and sides with rebellious Absalom. And so David says in verse 12 of Psalm 55, "It's not an enemy who reproaches me," as he's pouring his heart out. "Then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me, who has exalted himself against me. Then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man of my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God in the throng." And as I mentioned last night in the study, that sweet counsel together and walking to the house of God in the throng, there's a real painting of just this, I'm not great with words, but this sweet fellowship and this intimacy of friendship together. And that's broken. Ahithophel turned. And David is heartbroken about this. It's a sad chapter for him, and he's pouring his heart out to God here. Now, with that as a backdrop, forgiveness is not easy. It's not natural for us. For whatever reason, it's just not natural for us. And Peter, the Apostle Peter, he was pretty delighted in himself, it would seem like, because Peter comes to Jesus. New Testament, of course, we leave the Psalms. And Peter asked Jesus a question. I assume, I read into this, thinking that Peter's kind of patting himself on the back simultaneously while asking Jesus a question, which would be affirming to him. And Peter came to Jesus and said in Matthew 18:21, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times?" Peter perhaps thinking that he's demonstrated 7 times forgiveness a time or 2 or 3. And Jesus says, shockingly, to Peter, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Not even close, Peter. You aren't even in the ballpark. No, it's 70 times that which you're even thinking is quite generous of your ability to forgive." You see, as a believer particularly, we need to be forgiving. We need to love the brotherhood as the New Testament declares elsewhere. In fact, the Apostle Paul, in the book of Colossians, he says this, "As the elect of God, holy and beloved," this is Colossians 3:12, "put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, you also must do. But above all these things, put on love." And you know what the result of that is? We oftentimes stop right there, but if we read on from this Colossians 3, this 3:14 area, "Love, which is the bond of perfection, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts." That's the result of doing these things. There's a peacefulness, and it's a peace beyond which you're capable of doing. but there's this peace of God which will rule your hearts. And Paul goes on, of course, there. So, can I just say this? When we dress for the day, as the Apostle Paul says, put on, which is a clothing term. It's actually used the same term in the Greek with putting on your shirt and getting ready for the day. Put on, make sure you put on, besides your shoes and socks and shirt and so forth, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. Doing these things as Christ forgave you. Particularly, can I suggest, with the throng going to the house of God, with the brotherhood, with the brothers and sisters. So make sure you not only get dressed for the day, this weekday on this Thursday morning, but also when you dress for Sunday with your church clothes. In these days, double socks and warm boots and a flannel shirt and so forth. When you dress for church, make sure you put on these things also. So God bless you. Maranatha, may the Lord be magnified. Amen.